And we're back here with Jason Fladlien, the $250 million webinar guy. And dude, that's not hyperbole, right? Like there's actually $250 million in what? Gross revenue generated via
Yeah.
webinars? How do you calculate that?
There's more than that, but after a while, you kind of just if it ain't a half a billion, it might as well be a quarter billion. So it's somewhere in
Right.
between, but it's not a nice round number. But it's calculated based on either the webinars I've directly done myself, the webinars that I've assisted with others doing, both on the webinar live. Sometimes they bring me in just to close. Oftentimes that's what they do these days, and or that I've designed, been hired to create, or had some sort of meaningful input. Like I didn't just hang around on the sidelines and then took the credit for. Influentially, a quarter billion clients. Some of my clients alone, based on the webinars that they've done, that are literally my webinars, sans a couple different name changes, basically. Uh, I've had clients that have done over $100 million on their own just from the webinars that they modeled after my webinar.
Hmm. The perpetual traffic listener is one half us, one half agency, traffic driver, and then one half business owner. A lot of DDC, e-com, B2B. The webinar is not a one size fits all model, but it might be one of the more, if we're looking at a tool belt, it's
Mm.
easily a hammer or a screwdriver. It's one of those things that you're always going to need and just about anybody can use. So if you don't mind, and this is a tough question, but let's scaffold the webinar a little bit. Who's
Yeah.
it for? Who's it not?
Yeah, it's not for as many people as people think it is. The side effect, you're talking about the comic that can't bomb anymore. He has this thing in the back of his head that's like, is my stuff still good or not? I don't have a
There's
litmus
no way to
test, a
know.
measuring stick. So a lot of people come to me now because they know of my reputation with webinars and they're like, I want to make a webinar for this. And oftentimes I say, don't. It doesn't make sense to in your particular instance. Now, with that said, in the instances where a webinar makes sense, it usually makes the most sense. It is a 10x where everything else is a 2x for the areas it makes sense. So we can break that down. Before we do that, the webinar is the output of a certain amount of creative, strategic thinking. And if you master the strategic, creative thinking, that's even more valuable than the webinar itself is. And so before I ever want to create a webinar, I got to have a damn good offer. And it can't be a 9 out of 10. It's got to be a 10 out of 10. And the difference between a 9 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10 is significant. It is massive. And so we work and start on how do we create the best offer possible. So when you mentioned I'm the most quoted person in Alex's book is $100 million offers. I have a testimonial from Alex saying that the best or the thing that he's learned the most from was a product he purchased from me on how to create offers. Literally, the guy who's the best selling all time in the history of the planetary system that is the Milky Way
Mm.
on offers says I was the best thing he ever learned from. So
Is that product still available? Can people buy that now?
I don't know if it's available anymore. It's called Genius Webinars. I think it's still available. We're now going to update it because that product was created 6 years ago. So what I know now compared to what I knew then is significantly increased. My biggest weakness, Kasim, is I'm too ahead of the market. So probably most
Well, and for anybody
applicable.
that just heard Jason say that, that's actually not a humble brag. That's a really big problem.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Uh, so like I was too ahead in the webinar space. I should have claimed it much earlier because I could have really built a huge business on it. We were just doing webinars. We were never teaching this stuff. We created a course called Genius Webinars, and so Alex bought that, and I'm gonna update it now. But it's probably the most applicable in 2023 as we're recording this, even though I created it in 2017. But I want to create a new one. But so that's the course that Alex bought. It's called Genius Webinars, and he says it's the best course on offer creation and bonuses that he's ever seen. And so I'm like, that's awesome. And one of the reasons our webinars are so good, everybody likes the tactics and the techniques on the webinar, and I got some slick tactics. I can wow you with technique after technique after technique, but that is so less important than how do we create a really killer offer, and so that's a big part of it. An offer has three components to it. It's the deliverables themselves, it's the audience that you're putting it in front of, and then it's the messaging. So what's a good offer to audience A is not necessarily a good offer to audience B. And an offer presented in this fashion versus that fashion. So I always look at marketing at the end of the day. Kasim, here's a good metaphor for you. You have the chef and then you have the ingredients. If you're a amazing chef, but you got some really crappy ingredients, you're not going to cook that great of a meal. If you
Mhm.
got the best possible ingredients you could ever find, but you don't know what you do in the kitchen, you're not going to cook a very good meal. Real magic happens. Now we make good, we make do. Oftentimes, the biggest successes you see is they have really good ingredients and they're okay at being a chef, and that's good enough. Or they're an amazing chef, but
The market picks them up and carries them and then gives them the buoyancy they need to find better chefs down the line.
yeah, I can't tell you the number of guys I've seen that have really crappy webinars that still make millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's because timing is a factor too. So where the market is at that time and the offering that that person has that's in front of them, there's the convenience factor is a big deal. Whereas somebody wants a good enough solution today more so than a better solution tomorrow because they're in pain today. So they want a solution today.